Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the iOS Lead Essentials podcast. Here we discuss the strategies in your journey to become a complete senior iOS developer. My name is Bogdan, I'm a senior iOS developer and lead instructor in the iOS Lead Essentials program, the online training program for iOS developers who want to become complete senior developers. Today our special guest is Daniel from the Czech Republic, a senior iOS developer and student of the iOS Lead Essentials program. Hi Daniel and welcome.
Hi, Bogdan. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So, can you tell us your achievements in the program that we'll be discussing today so the audience knows where you're coming from?
All right. So, as Bogdan said, my name is Daniel. I'm an iOS developer, senior iOS developer, and I got to this position specifically because of the program. So, I think almost 1 year ago, when I was in the middle of my journey in the program, I got my salary increase almost 2 times. So, and that was obviously also because of the program. And I'm really thankful to you, Bogdan, also because of your lectures in the tooling session, and to Kai and Mike for that. So that's probably my main achievement.
Okay, and we'll probably find some other ones in the
Yeah, of
conversation,
course.
right? Awesome. So congratulations. That's really something. And for you watching the podcast, just stay until the end and learn how Daniel did it, and you can achieve a similar thing too. Our goal is to find replicable steps that others can follow to achieve the same. So, Daniel, how long have you been an iOS developer? And if you can tell us a bit about your journey with iOS, how you started.
Yeah, sure. I've been an iOS developer for 3 years now, and my journey started a little bit differently, maybe to some of the journeys that were presented here. I originally I don't have the computer science degree. I come from business and economics. So my major was actually international business. But 3 years ago, we were just having a great time during the summer with with some of my best friends, and they proposed an idea to me that involved making an app. Nobody from our company knew how actually Swift works, how iOS development works, and that's why I just took it to myself, and I tried to make a very simple app, and then I got sucked into that, and it was yeah. So it was very fun for me. I was just trying. Initially, I was trying to make the idea materialize, which we had, and then I got so deeper and deeper into that, and then I at some point I realized that I lack a lot of things. And fortunately for me, I had an acquaintance who not only mentored me at the time, but also like hired me to his company, and I became an intern in his company.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a journey, and I would say you showed leadership skills right from the start. Because when nobody in your group of friends knew iOS programming, you say, "Okay, I'm gonna take one for the team and see how this goes." Right. So,
Yeah.
excellent decision. Actually, it seems like you already got the benefits of that. Um,
Right.
and I'm sure it's a great journey, and it will just keep improving. Also, to me, having a mentor in the early part of your career is essential to make sure you are in the right direction, right? So of course you have a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, you like to learn stuff, you like to do stuff, and just having that guidance is definitely making things more efficient, and it seems like you are on the right path, right?
Yeah, I would just add that the mentor that I had, so it is my one of my best friends now also, and he's a very like serious guy, and he was taking it very seriously. And when I was making some mistakes, he was not just letting it go. He was explaining to me I made this mistake and what should be like the right solution. And this was like, actually, even before I was hired to his company, he was like yeah, doing proper pull requests with me and so on. So it really helps, because when you start iOS development or any kind of development, I think you can learn from, of course, indie developers. On You can learn on YouTube, you can learn from some, yeah, Medium articles. But when you take a lot of things from different places, your code becomes very like
Spaghetti.
very, yeah, very spaghetti and unrecognizable in some moments. So you look at one part of your code and you see some patterns there, because, for example, you read something in Medium and just copy pasted it, and then you, for example, got stuck at one place, at another place, and go to Stack Overflow, and then you find something completely
Right.
different, which doesn't suit the styling of the code. And yeah, my mentor really helped me with that. So should I say now, probably not a mentor but a friend, helped me with that. And it was, I think it was like the most beneficial thing, because
Yeah.
at the start you don't realize how important it is to maintain the styling, or the, yeah, the styling basically of your code base. So if you write something different, if you're writing a new feature, or if you're just opening a new file, creating a new file, and you're trying to write with different indentation, for example, or something like that, your code base just becomes a little bit of mess. So
Yeah.
this was certainly a big help for him.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. And I think there's a great learning point where you do something. You're a beginner, you see some idea, you input it in practice, and then if somebody can come in and say at exact the same solution, pinpoint the mistakes, or let's not call it mistakes, because software is not black and white, right?
Yeah.
Or right or wrong. It's suboptimal maybe, or there's a better way to approach it, a cleaner, more efficient way. Then if they can show you that on the code you already wrote, that's like a point where you make that click in your head, and it's like, ah, okay, now I get it. Like, instead of using this, I should be using the other thing, because, and you have like the reasoning behind it. So you already like are storing that information more efficiently. Whereas, like you said, when reading articles, or it's like you're discontinued from the author. There's no feedback loop, right? You see something, you try to apply it. Like, there's nobody checking to see like, okay, that's not going well. And yeah, I also benefited from that a few times, and it makes a huge difference. Cool. How'd you find out about the program?
So as I said, I started to develop something, let's call it something, 3 years ago. So then I was hired. So it was, I think, in July. I was hired to be an intern in, I think it was December or maybe January. And then after half of a year, I was like hired in another company as a junior developer. And during my, I think, first 3 or 4 months as a junior developer, I was having a lot of struggles because of inexperience, because of some other things that I was not like probably, yeah, acquainted with. And I started to look at some YouTube channels which were trying to solve some problems. And then I came across, of course, the Essential Developer YouTube channel. And I think I came across some of the older videos which Kayo alone made. And I think it was maybe the first video that I saw on Essential Developer was about singletons, that we should not use them. And at that time, I was having a lot of singletons in my code base because it was not written by me. And yeah, and I thought, well, he's talking truth. I also see those problems in my code. And then during the winter, I also had some big refactoring, which started in autumn, and I was having even more struggles. And then I suddenly heard, I don't remember actually whether it was on the YouTube channel, or I think it was also promoted by some writers I don't remember by whom, but I began to think maybe I should take the course. And then I think at that time, I went to the website of Essential Developer, iOS Lead Essentials program, and Kaio and Mike announced also that there is a crash course, which is free before the actual program. And I thought, well, it should be something cool, and I can understand a bit more about the program, whether I need to buy it, whether I don't need to buy it. And I was so impressed by the crash course that I didn't think twice, actually, because right from the start, right from the first lecture, they showed the composite pattern, as far as I remember, with this fallback logic and so
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah.
So I was so impressed because it was like for the first time for me that I saw this pattern and how it was applied by Kai and Mike. I was so impressed that I thought, wow, if we as developers can do these kind of things, then I should certainly learn how to do it. And then, of course, the price for the program was a little bit like it was not an easy decision for the price for me because at that time I didn't have like high salary. I didn't have a lot of like spare money, but I thought that it should like be for me as some kind of investment. So yes, it probably now it is like expensive for me, but it certainly from what I saw, I thought that certainly it would pay off, and that's why I made this decision. So yeah.
Cool, cool. So everything started with the YouTube channel, right?
Yes.
And then the crash course, and it's like a natural progression to try to learn more and more. So of
Hmm.
course you got into the end result, which is the program itself. So you talked about struggling as a junior developer at that time. Do you remember some of the things that were most problematic to you, that caused the biggest friction? Let's say.
Yeah. So yeah, probably this spaghetti code, which yeah, so which we already mentioned. Everything was so connected, was so interconnected in my code base that every time I made a change at one place, I needed to also adjust my code in some other places. And so
Right.
if you watch even some videos from the crash course where Kai and Mike make commits, they make commits with maybe three, two files, one
Yeah.
file. But at the time I was junior developer, I was making commits with 18 files, 25 files, 38 files. And I thought, well, maybe it's not the right thing. And also, you need to remember that somebody is then reviewing your code. And when he
Yeah.
is reviewing 38 changed files, it is very difficult for a person. So I thought, yeah, this was certainly not right. Also, a lot of singletons. It's a very convenient way to access like some things globally, but
Yeah.
it brings a lot of problems from race conditions if you're not handling like writing and reading from singleton to yeah just uh, all places in the code that can access your class, which is also like not right.
Yeah. So
Probably
it's
if you're
hidden. Yeah.
yeah, it should be somehow hidden by the domain that you're actually developing. So maybe if you're developing a core Bluetooth framework and then you're also like trying to, I don't know, access some API data, it is not probably correct because they should not be dependent, or maybe they should be dependent, but with some kind of abstraction, some kind of layer, and they still shouldn't know about like each other. They should know about each other only through that layer. So yeah, that, and also I would say because I had a very big task in refactoring a project and also making a new design. The new design was not like a problem for me because yeah, I started my journey as an iOS developer with Swift UI. I also promoted it in our project. And because Swift UI has some limitations with navigation, for example, or some deep linking stuff, we had like Swift UI on granular level, so making simple views, and then gluing everything together with UIKit navigation. So it was not a problem for me, but the problem for me was like that I didn't know how to organize my code well. Like I knew that I had some probably suboptimal solutions, and also didn't know how to architecture everything correctly and how to handle some things. And yeah, when I saw some things during the crash course, and when I saw also what will be discussed in the Lead Essentials program, I thought, well, this should help me solve those issues, because I was like seeing how it can actually be solved. I think one of the lectures during the crash course was like handling the legacy code base by Kaio and Mike. They showed
Yeah.
how, provided that you have tests, how you can change the legacy code to the new code without breaking any behavior. And it was also like very impressive for me. And at the time, I also didn't have any tests, and I was promoting, I like was screaming at my job that we need to implement some tests, we need to do this, we need to do this. And for the first time, I think it was rejected, like, we don't have time, we don't have time. But I tried to push it, and I said, now you think that we don't have time, but when we implement those tests, we will save a lot of time. So yeah, and obviously Lead Essentials program helped me to better understand how to TDD stuff. Yeah, and yeah, some of the techniques, stubbing, spying, and this kind of stuff. This really helped when I was refactoring my own code base. I was basically actually like following the path of the program when I was developing my new code base. It was very cool.
Nice. Nice. I can relate so much to what you're describing here on a few occasions, especially with testing, because at some point I also like found myself in the situation where I said, okay, we need tests. This is no longer possible to be tested manually, but with testing is like, even if somebody gives you a bit of confidence, say, okay, let's start writing tests. If you don't know how to write them, they're not gonna be what we expect them to be, right? So you're not reaping the benefits, and it's hard to convince the other people in the team to join in or to see them as something beneficial, right? So again, if unless you get the full, I don't know, how to on tests,
Yeah.
and how to avoid coupling with production code, how to avoid duplicating a lot of logic in the tests and stuff like that, it's hard to convince someone. So
Yeah. And also, I came across the issue also when people are still using tests, but they are using tests in the wrong way. For example, they are firstly trying to write production code, and then they are covering it with tests.
yeah,
So it is not a very good way, because by that you're trying to adjust your tests to what you have written in the production
yeah,
code, which
yeah,
leads to sometimes not failing tests. So you're writing a test which will never fail, and you don't know about that. You're seeing this blue mark that it has passed, and you're very happy about that, but it doesn't mean anything.
yeah. I mean, that's something you learn the hard way, right? Um, when I started with testing, of course, I was doing post production code testing. So it was exactly like that. Like, some of the tests would never fail, like you said, and you would only find out when you're in, like, you see the bug in production, and it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, but we have a test for that, and
Yeah.
you check the test, and the test is always passing, because I don't know, for many reasons, right? So it can work to some degree, but I totally understand what you're saying. When you're just doing the production code without any test, it's not testable. You don't have any seams, so you can check the side effects of any calls. So you kind of try to hack something afterwards. It's definitely less optimal than test driving it. And the other thing which I wanted to mention was related to something you said in the beginning, like having to change many files at the same time. And of course, the hard coupling between all the components in the project. I felt that, and I remember it perfectly, even I think it's more than 10 years, but ago when this happened, I still remember it. I had to, from my project, I had to extract some glass and use it in another project, because it was like it suited that other project well, and the company wanted to say, okay, let's reuse this, and so fine. And I moved the file to the other project. I got like 100 compiler errors, found a bunch of other files. I think it was still Objective-C, so you would see the imports. It's like, okay, now I need to copy how many? Like 10 imports. I copied these files over, and then I got 200 errors because each of those files had other references and other references. That's basically, you could almost extract the entire project just to be able to reuse that class, because everything depended on everything. So at that point, I realized, like, okay, maybe this is more complicated than I thought, and like I'm sure there's a better way to like make things reusable, right? It's not okay to depend, like you said, and especially with singletons, where they are hidden. Right? There's no, like, if you look at the interface of the class, there's no mention of the singletons used, right? It's just in implementation detail, when it's very easy to locate some, I don't know, service or reachability or whatever. Just call the shared instance and be done. But when you try to reuse, when you try to, later I found that when you try to test that, it always leaves you in a, I don't know, in a unhappy place where it's like, okay, this is incredibly hard to do now, so all that convenience goes away. So yeah, it's very, very good examples. I think I can definitely feel your struggles, because I struggled in similar ways.
I would also mention that you also need to learn how to refactor as well, because when I was when I was refactoring the code, so I had a lot of singletons, and I was so sick and tired of them that I said, oh, we will remove all of the singletons and make them not singletons. And so you mentioned 100 errors, so I got around 1,300 errors, like at once. and then I sat like that and said, wow, I will need to solve all of those things. But I solved them by doing it in a hard way, but I solved them.
That's it. So again, super grateful to that. Before I joined the program, a few years ago, I thought that refactoring is something that you do, like there's no recipe for refactoring, right? You just change your code in some way, and it usually goes by, I can build a project now, I start refactoring, and I cannot build it for 4 hours or something like that. That's what I thought refactoring is, in like a higher point of view, right? And as soon as I joined, I said, oh, whoa, like, of course I knew you could refactor in smaller steps and things like that, but being able to just make small changes, to have like a clear recipe, like now we do this and now we do this, and at every point you are in a green state, tests are passing, project is building, everything is fine. And of course, being backed by tests, so all these things for me were revolutionary, because like you, I knew how to do it the hard way, like go in there and work really hard and spend those 4 hours to make the build pass again. But that, I mean, in my experience, that led to so many mistakes, especially when you are in a rush to put everything back together. You make silly mistakes, like you use the wrong instance, you use the wrong type, you whatever, like, and of course no tests, so no feedback, right? Until the QA gets their hands on the build, it's like everything is no longer working. So again, refactoring was a big one for me too. Just seeing that differently, how to approach it in a systematic way. And of course, after going through the program and saw the references to Martin Fowler's book on refactoring, I saw, oh wow, this is actually pretty standardized. You don't have to be changing everything at once and hope it works. There are clear recipes to do that. So
I think I really agree with that. And also a very important thing that I didn't mention, which was a mistake by me, was like this whole idea of composition root. This changed like my software development experience at once and forever, because so firstly, I was in this state where I had a lot of singletons. That's why I didn't need to provide any like classes via construction injection or via any other injection. So everything was fine, but it was not testable. It was very, very bad. Then I switched to, of course, construction injection and then method injections at some places. So I was combining those things according to the semantics of the code. But then I faced the issue that I need some kind of dependency injection, maybe framework. So a lot of people were saying to me, oh, you need service locators, or you need some kind of, you need to integrate Swinject and so on. And I was saying, why should I do this? Like it should be like somehow possible without all those service locators and so on. And then when I started the program, maybe I think it was also in the crash course where Kaio and Mike also showed how you can actually construct your code base with, for example, with SwiftUI UI and with UIKit UI just by replacing 2 lines of code in the SYN delegate.
Right. I think that's in the quiz app series.
Quiz. Right. So and this was also like fundamental for me. So I thought, wow, I can actually inject all the needed dependencies at the composition root, and I get rid of all those service locators. And then this also, of course, composition root is like the key. So then you come across this cross-cutting concerns, like, for example, threading, like, for example, logging, like, for example, I don't know. It can be authentication, right? Passing the access token and so on. So it can be whatever you can think of. For example, also, Bluetooth signals, location signals, it can be all handled in the composition root. And this was like also fundamental for me because I understood how I can inject all those things without actually polluting my code with all those service locators or third-party frameworks or so on and so on.
Yeah, I agree. And I was also impressed by seeing the composition root pattern in practice, especially with separating cross-cutting concerns from types. So if you extract threading and logging and authentication and, like you said, other things like cross-cutting concerns, our components are so simple, right? It's so much easier to deal with, to test, to write, to read. It's amazing how those simple ideas can change the structure of the components so much. And of course, it's when it's easy, everybody wants to work with those files, with those types. Very easy to reason about. So to me, that was also amazing. I think, at least in my experience, the more experienced I got, the more things I learned from the program and outside the program, the easier my code is to read. So the simpler it is. I no longer do, I don't know, crazy algorithms and some weird solutions. No, everything's so simple, like small classes, small files.
Before it was one function for 100 lines and the file for 1,500 lines. And now it's, I agree. It makes your code much simpler. And also you need to remember that, for example, if you're trying to log everything like at the place where the action actually like happens, for example, in some class which is not in the composition root, you're breaking the single responsibility principle. So this
Yeah.
class actually should only deal with some, I don't know, data transformations, for example, and you're also
Yeah.
trying to log something, so it adds the responsibility. And then when you need to change this class, you would also need to change this behavior as well.
Yeah.
So this is not how things should work, probably.
Yeah. I mean, they work for at maybe an initial level, and then it becomes very hard to manage.
Yeah.
Because that's the complication, right? If you have like a class that's doing all these things at the same time, authentication and its own logic and handling errors and creating a bunch of other objects, and it's like everything becomes so much more complicated and hard to do. And yeah, I remember one of the first projects I joined had like a 3,000 4,000 lines of app delegate. That was the first class I saw. I was like, wow, never. I'll need like a year just to understand what's here. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
of course, singletons and shared mutable state, even worse than singletons.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
at least in singletons, if you just have the instance, if it's not mutable, then maybe there are not that many problems. But with shared mutable state,
Yeah.
it's all race conditions, crashes, and
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
that's correct.
Cool. So we really dived into this one, but I think our experience back in the days, they are very similar, and of course the like feeling that something is wrong but not knowing where to or how to change it. So
Yeah.
glad that's in the past now.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned how you decided to join. It was very easy for you to join the program after going to the crash course and seeing all the free content out there. Of course, a big investment, as you said, but totally worth it, like in my case as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the experience within the program? How was that for you at the beginning? How do you start applying those concepts? Like, did you practice? Did you felt some of them could be implemented right away, like you said?
Mm-hmm.
How do you describe that?
Yeah, I would say so. I applied. It was previous spring. I applied, and I think I watched the first bundle of lectures which are preparing you for the program. So we're kind of like yeah, tell you about the rules, and then about the principles, and then about yeah the way how we should work within the program. This I think I watched almost in one day. So I was so enthusiastic at the start, and then I think the first module is API module, and right away I think as I was watching the videos, I was thinking, okay, so I have this problem in my code, and then I saw something in the program and I thought, well, I can actually try to apply this in my code and see if this works. And this should work. For example, as I told you, so it was also during the previous spring when I watched the crash course and I saw this composite print design pattern. Right. And I thought, wow, we also have this kind of logic. I think almost everyone has this logic inside their apps where they have I have to download, for example, something from the backend, and then if it doesn't happen, if it fails, then it should look at the cache, at the local cache.
Some cache, yeah.
Yeah. So and then, for example, if it loads something from the backend, it should save to the cache. So we also, of course, have this inside our app, and I thought, well, this could be the entry point where I start applying like what I learned during the program. And I think it was the first thing that I actually made. And then as I was watching more and more, I was applying those principles, and I was trying to find where I can apply them in my project,
Right.
because I knew that even if I don't understand them like right away, I need to dive a little bit deeper, and for sure I will find where to apply them, because those principles are not, which are taught in the program, are not like domain specific, are not industry specific. They're universal.
Yeah.
And people doing the program, I think that will agree with that. And so you can find application for them in the places where you wouldn't imagine that you will, because they're so universal. And that's like maybe the key point. By applying those universal principles, you make your code so much better. And it doesn't depend, it's not only applicable also to the iOS, because I can also tell you that the previous autumn we started to develop the Kotlin multi-platform module for our app. And I also took the responsibility, and I said, well, I can do this. We can try to share some logic across Android and iOS. And I made some of the stuff in KMM, and it is not different. It is not different from iOS, Android. It is just applying those universal principles which work on every platform. It's not only mobile development, it's also
Yeah.
web development. And this is what helps a lot, I think. And that's
Yeah.
what I learned from the program.
Yeah. And I think it comes down to, if you remember from the crash course where Kyle explained how his journey went, he saw that in the iOS industry, at least at that point years ago, there was no real standard, right? There were no explicit ways to build clean, testable, modular apps. So he had to go to other platforms and see how they are doing, like platforms that are have more experience, like I know C# and Java and other platforms. So that's why the reusability is at that high level. We're trying to see all these different platforms, languages, even paradigms, right? So they apply to functional programming, to reactive programming, to all kinds of other paradigms you would see, like. And I think that's the biggest benefit, because like you said, you learn them once, and then even if you have to switch jobs or want to take a leap of curiosity and try something new, you can still know how to organize your code, how to make it testable, how to make it modular, how to make small commits, all these principles and techniques, how to test drive everything, to make sure you only compose in a centralized place and make everything else independent. All these things like are independent of the platform, are also applicable to Objective-C, to C++, whatever, like.
Yeah.
Same thing. And the more you are exposed to these things, like I remember talking to other fellow developers in the academy, you start to like see less and less of the platform and of the language, and you start to think more in these high level lines, where how you architect things. It no longer matters which one's the the UI framework, the persistence framework. Like people, especially junior developers, think a lot in terms of the framework.
Yes.
Like which framework I'm using. Like I'm gonna use this because this is the best. And it's like, and then you switch to like no longer caring that much about the framework. It's just an expression of the architecture. I think Uncle Bob said this for the first time I heard it, like frameworks are just details, right? It shouldn't matter.
I think also I noticed that when I entered the program, and when we had the virtual day, and like during the first time when people were asking some questions in Slack, Kaya and Mike, and I think also you, like all the instructors always get the question, what is like the best way to do this? And the easiest and probably the most like honest answer is there is no like best way. There is like the way that suits your case. And there is no like best like from this MVC, MVVM, I don't know, MV something. UIKit is not better than SwiftUI, but probably some people will say it is because it's more advanced. But it's not about what is better. It's about what like best suits your case.
Exactly.
And you shouldn't like follow this this mindset that you learn how to apply MVVM, for example, in SwiftUI because it helps you a lot in SwiftUI, and because of this reactive programming, published observables, and so on and so on. And then you should for sure bring it back to the UIKit. Of course you can, but it is not like 100% that it will suit your case. And some people also think that if they apply MVC, then they will end up with massive view controllers. But I think Kai and Mike also like mentioned it and highlighted it. Yeah, like 100 times during the program, that you can also make MVC, but make it in a right way. So making small MVCs, composing MVCs, not making everything in one MVC.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is also like the minds. I think this is actually the switch where you switch from junior or middle iOS developer to some higher levels, where you stop thinking that you know everything, probably that you know that this solution is the best. When you start to think, okay, what suits my case? Okay, what should I do now? And then also, I think Uncle Bob wrote this. Those things that we've just talked about, like UI frameworks, persistence, API clients, and so on, those are infrastructure. Those are like the most outer layer. And those can be omitted at first. You should not, you are able to not care about them at first. Like you can make all your app and only at the end decide what infrastructure you will bring to the app. And this really helps when you are not focused on, oh, I will use SwiftUI. Oh, I will use, for example, Realm for my persistence layer. I will just make an app according to those principles, according to clean architecture, following the solid principles, and then I will decide. Probably, maybe you can decide at the beginning if you think that you know the answer. Certainly, a lot of developers think that they know, and they're like usually right. But it is not how you like must do this. You mustn't decide at the first place what you will use. It's not necessary.
I agree, and that's a hard point as well. That, I mean, especially unexperienced developers, they want to show progress, right? So their boss, their team lead says, okay, we need to build this, and it's like, I need to show something. And what can I show? Like UI, right? I need to show something that I'm fetching data from the API, but the API is not ready. So all these preconceptions that if I don't do UI and if I don't do networking right away, then I have nothing to show my progress. So that's why a lot of us just jump into those frameworks right away. And of course, they make the decision as soon as possible. Whereas, as you said, and I really agree with that point, that you can try to postpone that decision as much as possible. Just try to work on the logic, try to work on, even with a mocked service layer, right? You can talk to your backend team and just scratch some contract between the client and the API, so they know where they're going with the development if they haven't done it already, and you also know how to prepare your app for that. And it gives you so much flexibility. Of course, at the beginning, you have no idea of the requirements, right? Is this going to require some kind of special authentication? Do I need to use anything other than, I don't know, HTTP? Maybe we need to, maybe we don't. So just very good point. Just keep working on the business, on the use cases, business rules, then building other models like presentation, and plug in the infrastructure at the end. I fully agree with that, and it gives you like as much as you can postpone that, the better you can decide. And back to your original point, yeah, I see that a lot in how, let's say, less experienced developers ask questions like which one is best, right? Which architecture is best? And by the way, by architecture they mean design patterns. Like
Yeah,
is
yeah.
MVVM best or Viper or whatever? And as you grow in experience, you start to see these things as tools in a tool belt. Not like a screwdriver is not better than a hammer, not worse. It's just a different thing. You use it for different operations, right? Different
Yeah.
tasks. So as you grow in experience and you learn more things, more patterns, more techniques and things, you can think of, okay, in this case maybe it's better to apply this or that, or like you said in the beginning, we're saying, okay, we actually mixed Swift UI with UI Kit, right? You don't have to decide like we will just one. No, they were created to work together. So if that's what you need and it suits your case, then why not? Right? It doesn't have to be like a lot of people take pride in like our app is pure Swift UI. Nobody cares about that. It's
Yeah. It's how it
just
works.
yeah. So I fully agree. So it's
And
just a matter
also,
of experience.
yeah, about the UI frameworks, a lot of people think that, oh, yeah, but my client is pushing me, so I need to show him something. Kaya and Mike actually show the way how you can show the clients without actually doing something in UIKit or Swift UI. You have
Yeah,
storyboards.
yeah,
You just and it's like the easiest way to actually build the layout, and then it's just a prototype at the end, right? If you need to
yeah.
show something how it works, it's just a prototype. And then if you want to do everything programmatically, of course you can, but it can be postponed. If you need to show it right away, you have storyboards,
No,
for example.
that's another awesome tip, let's say, or technique. Because what happens a lot of times is you spend all the time to build the features, let's say, like the feed in the
Yeah,
repo we use in the program. You spend all the time to build the networking, the cache, the UI, and then send it to your product owner, to your designers, to every. And usually, at the first time they see it, it's like, no, this is not what I had in mind. We should be changing this. We should be doing that. And you're like, no, but I spent like 2 weeks to create this, and now you're telling me to change everything, right? Whereas when you do a quick prototype, as soon as possible, like you have the meeting today, tomorrow you send a prototype. Hacked, uh, code imperfect, it's just a prototype, of course. And then you get early feedback, and everybody say, oh, we don't need a table here because we want some horizontal scrolling, and this looks right or doesn't look right. And that's super beneficial because then you refine the requirements, right, at that early stage. So then when you keep working towards the end feature, it's already like you avoid a lot of the friction, right? You get feedback, and then if they tell you, oh, change that, like you can adapt the prototype really easily and send it back, and until you are all in agreement, right? This is what we want. Yes, okay, now I'll plug in the backend and caching and all the other features like pagination, and like I don't need to spend all the time up front and then I don't know be just it happens so many times that you have to go back and throw away what you
yeah,
worked on. So I really like that approach where you put something in their hand as soon as possible, and it also connects with the idea of continuous delivery, right?
yeah,
You want to like what's the first deliverable is the prototype, right? Until you can deliver an app, you deliver the prototype, and it doesn't have to be like they understand that it's a prototype. So Mm,
Hmm.
it's just to get feedback, and very good tool with many other tools with BDD and writing specs, getting the right specs together as a team. Like all these things really add up and save so much time.
Yeah, probably the last thing that I would mention in this regard is it's yeah, you almost I think mentioned it, but sometimes developers try to optimize things before they actually need to
Yeah,
optimize them. So it's like a little bit connected with this UI thing. But sometimes you try to make your algorithm work perfectly, but then you realize that you actually don't need this algorithm.
yeah,
But you spend the whole day writing this algorithm, for example. I don't know, image processing, for example,
yeah,
if you want this to be custom, right? So you're trying to do it as good as possible, but then you realize that probably some requirements changed and something like that. So this is also like the problem, because you actually can get frustrated very quickly when you do those things, when you
yeah,
try to when you try to optimize things in advance, and then you come across this, yeah, denied requirement, for example. And then you say to yourself, well, I spent so much time, I spent so much energy, and now it's denied. How
yeah,
this can be? Yeah. So
yeah.
and then
It's
and
it's
then
frustrating at least. But it's like that. Like it happens to me even now if I'm not careful.
yeah, of
Like
course.
I get into a state, into this flow, and nothing's breaking the flow. There's no point where I have the self-awareness to say, wait a second, why am I doing this? Is this really needed? Like, do I really need to finish, I don't know, adding all these features to that class, or, um, like I said, doing some, I don't know, image processing algorithm just to correct some image mistake or something like that. Um, but it happens. So again, having that mindset of efficiency, always trying to think of what you're doing. And one of the techniques is splitting everything to the point where it's like an atomic operation. Like I do a small change, I commit. That's why it's important, because then you have that pause after you finished with that small change that took you maybe 5 minutes to do or less. You have a pause, like a brief moment of time where you say, okay, now I've done this, like what's the next step I need to do? Or like I'm in a green state, right?
Hmm.
Everything's still working, still building. So I'm not in a rabbit hole for 3 hours and
Yeah.
trying to dig myself out. Yeah, super helpful if you can avoid it.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So, what about the, like you told me how you experienced the program, and of course being full speed at the beginning, studying as much as possible. Did you keep the same pace till the end, or did you actually, I don't know, go into like a slowdown?
Yeah, at the start it was very, very high. So I was basically like doing it every day. Then it began to be during the weekends, because I was doing a lot of stuff, not only work, but also some other stuff in my life. And yeah, so it began to be only during the weekends, and of course the pace slowed down. But I think it didn't it didn't make my experience of the program worse,
Right.
because as I said, if you I was trying to recollect what I listened during the previous time and apply that also to what I was listening now. And because I had everything like applied in my working code base, I didn't lose any progress, because sometimes people start to watch some courses and they don't get the point like instantly. And then they, for example, do something else for 2 weeks, and then they come back and they don't remember anything. But
Yeah.
because I had a lot of things actually applied in my work, I didn't lose my progress. So I
Right.
didn't need to start from from the get go every time. Yeah, so that's why even those like big pauses which I had during the course, this was not like really bad for me. because I
And
remembered some things because of the work.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And overall, how long did it take to complete the program?
Actually almost 1 year. Yeah.
1 year. Okay.
Yeah, because of big pauses that I had.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. It happens.
Yeah, this happens. I actually thought at the beginning, I thought that I was moving at so fast pace that I would be able to like do the program 3 times during this year, but but then some accidental things happen and you cannot control them. So yeah, this is not something too bad, but yeah, you always need to keep in mind that some accidents may happen, and
yeah, and
everything
it requires extra discipline to get back on track. I think it's harder to do it, like, I don't know, like you said, do it every day for a few weeks and then make a big pause and do it only in the weekends. It's harder, but it is sometimes, like, you cannot control when your availability is. And
yeah, for me it was also easier because I have this trait. When I stop learning something, I don't mean like only software development. When I stop learning something, I feel very almost upset. I'm moody. I'm trying to do some things which will improve my mindset, but at the end, what improves my mindset, like ultimately, is learning new things. And that's why it was easier for me to get back, because at some point I was feeling, oh, I'm lacking some new knowledge, I need to learn something new. And I was like 150% sure that if I continue to watch the program, I will learn something new.
Awesome. So I want to ask you a few questions about your achievements we discussed in the beginning. You especially mentioned being able to increase your salary. So I know a lot of people are curious about how you achieve such a thing. If you can tell me how you achieved it, how was it, stuff like that.
Yeah, I must say that I had like a mix of things that led to this happening. So first of all, obviously, so I was improving the code base. I was injecting, for example, testing. I made a new UI, which so I refactored a lot of code. So I was taking responsibility basically. And higher responsibility brings, of course, higher benefits if it is like the normal condition, right? So if I would be very upset if I was taking more responsibility, but those in charge would tell me, no, this doesn't matter. Because I think the higher the responsibility, as I said, the higher the benefits. And for me, like the trigger in the future, if I would become, for example, a lead developer or a CTO, for me, the trigger to think about like upgrading my worker's salary or improving his conditions would be his willingness to take much more responsibility than he currently has. And that's what got me probably to this point. So I was trying to refactor the code. Then I implemented testing, as I said, and then also proposed some of the decisions that we implemented in our code base. Not only the code base, but also you need to have some soft skills in place to convince people. Because if you're only writing good code, this could be unnoticed for a very long time. But if you are making it verbal, like you're saying what you are doing, this not only helps you like get noticed, but it also helps you to understand a little bit more what you are doing exactly.
Right.
Because at some point you can lose this. So you can take more and more responsibility, but you could not recognize that you are actually taking more responsibility by not saying it, by just keeping it to your own, by hiding in your shell, for example. It's comfortable for you to take more responsibility. It's comfortable to you to write good code, but nobody knows about that. For example, if you're the only developer in the team, which some startups have still, it could be very difficult for a CTO to know that you are you're becoming better. So
Yeah.
you need to somehow verbalize that. And in my case, it was by saying what I've done and by proposing new things, which could relate not only to the code base, but also to the nature of the business. So how it can become better from my point of view, from my expertise, for example. So yeah, for me, this probably was the key. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really, really enjoying this conversation. If you'd have to summarize like the main takeaways you got from the program, what would they be?
Well, I think, learn those universal principles which will help you not only like at the specific place with the specific requirements, but which will help you universally. So wherever you go, whatever you do, whichever platform you use, if you learn those principles, if you learn those basics, not always basics, of course, because there are some complex things, but if you learn them, they will help you a lot. Yeah, also don't be stuck with something specific, for example UI framework, right? So think differently, think in a more broad way, right? So what you can do universally, and probably then just postpone the decision to choose the UI framework or whatever.
Very, very good point. And this is the point where I asked my guest to give advice. What's your, I wouldn't call it a secret because people want the secret, like.
Yeah, well, probably not for you an advice, because I think uh, you're a successful guy already. So
Yeah, but
I'm
there's always room.
yeah, of course. Yeah, as I said, what applies for me is just always to be hungry. Probably the right mindset is to do more, to take more responsibility. I would say that, money will come, conditions will come, everything will come, but your mindset will not come. Mindset is from yourself. Nobody will come to you and give you this mindset. Somebody can
Right.
come to you and give you money, somebody can come to you and give you conditions, but you need to do something that is only possible from yourself. And our mindset and our approach is only possible from like ourselves, right? Nobody can instill this into us. This is just ourselves. And when you do those things, the benefits will come. I think this is my advice.
Awesome. Awesome. So, Daniel, I really enjoyed talking to you today. Thanks for
The same.
coming out here and sharing your story. Keep in touch.
Yeah. Once again, thank you for having me.
It
Yeah,
was a pleasure.
it was a pleasure to talk to you. And if we can help someone listening to this podcast, it would be really great, because knowing that you don't only care about yourself, but also that you help someone achieve their goals is awesome. Yeah. And so just by the way, so anybody who is watching, listening to this podcast, I'm of course in social networks, so you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Facebook if you want to. So yeah, just connect to me if you want. If you have some questions, I'll be very open to answer them.
Awesome, Daniel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
And
you once again.
for you watching, if you want to learn more, just visit us at essentialdeveloper.com, and there you can find a bunch of free resources to improve your iOS dev skills. And you can also find us on the social channels like YouTube, Twitter, like the ones we mentioned. So see you soon. Bye.